Paul Neiffer is a man in demand, especially before the crops make it to the field. And in large part, it's because he listened to his dad and inherited his mom's math skills. Hi, I'm Dave Price, and this is the American Farmland Owner Podcast. Paul is a man of many things. He's a farmer, he's a CPA, and he's a speaker who travels all over the place to counsel farmland owners and investors on the tax side of agriculture. He also writes a column on the Substack platform called Farm CPA Report. He joined us here on the podcast last year. Some things have changed since then, and others have stubbornly stuck around. But let's ease into this diverse conversation that we're about to have by talking to this man who really appreciates how to pile up the frequent flyer miles. We're going to get into the meaty stuff here in a minute, but will you talk about your life on the road? Because it's fun to follow you, fun to follow your column and stuff. And hey, I'm speaking here, whatever. Will you talk a little bit about that? I mean, there's an art to that because that's not for everybody.
Yeah. So, you know what, my peak, I think 2019 might have been my peak. I think I was in a national car rental, a rental car, 133 days. and I wasn't purely in national. I had to be in Avis on about 10 days. So I think I peaked out about 145 days in a rental car in 2019. These years, you know, it's more like 60 or 70 days at the most, I think. But, you know, it sort of ebbs and flows. You know, the what I call the farmer speaking circuit is this time of year, January and February through early March. You know, Commodity Classic is going on as we tape this. I was there yesterday. And then it sort of stops for, you know, when you have planting season. You know, farmers are not interested in doing anything related to you know, being at an event. So typically my April, May has usually been a little bit slow. But believe it or not, Lance Woodbury at Pinion and we started last year a peer group for CPA firms or professional firms that deal with farmers a lot. And we started that last year, and we had one in-person meeting in May and then one in November. Well, this year we've got two groups. So we're going to have 2 meetings in May and 2 meetings in November. So I have that. And then I teach a lot of CPAs and tax professionals on farm taxes. So starting I'll have an event or two in June, and then in July, that'll start up. And then I'm also going golfing in Scotland with 3 retired CPA partners of mine from CLA in July. So that'll be a month. And then I got the Farm Financial Standards meeting in Lexington, Kentucky at the end of July. And then in August, that's heavy duty tax CPE type stuff. And then September is pretty mild because most tax preparers are tied up with the final extensions in both September through October 15th. And then right after October 15th, it's going to be nonstop until probably mid-December of meetings and being on the road. So I've been a 1K on United, which is their top level, other than they have a special one above 1K, but 1K is their top level. I've been that for, I think, 5 years now. And before that, I was a diamond on Delta for about 4 years. So I typically close to 100, maybe 100 and some flights a year. So I think this year I'm already up to 20, I think, somewhere in there.
See, with all your free time, you should be some kind of travel influencer.
Yeah,
like 20-somethings are doing,
I'm
right?
not on TikTok yet, and I don't think I ever will be. But I like to play pickleball. I tell myself I'm on the pickleball diet. You know, if I can play 5 or 6 days a week, I can lose a pound a week, and I'm trying to lose about another 10 pounds. I've lost about 12 to 15 pounds so far over a few months. So I'm just trying to slim down a little bit, and then I play golf when I can. Matter of fact, I played Sunday, and for me, I played pretty good. I shot a 37 on for 9 holes, and I missed a couple birdies. That would have put me 1 under par if I'd made that. So yeah, not too bad.
Not too bad at all. Well, and we'll have to touch base later this year. We can check notes. We're going on a family trip to Scotland.
Okay. This will be my second time to Scotland. I went on a golf trip about 30 years ago, back when I could hit it a lot farther, and played up at Royal Dornick, which is like the fourth best golf course in the world. It's not on the open tour, but it's a very nice course. And then played Royal St. George, which they've hosted the Open almost 20 times now. So it was a fun trip. So I'm looking forward to it.
I'm almost hesitant to bring up this first topic to you. Now, you've written, I should have gone through your columns and counted how many times I saw in a headline BOI of some sort, right?
Yeah, don't
There
get me
have been
started.
so many ups and downs and back and forth. So I'm almost nervous, frankly, bringing it up to you because there was something, as we record here in early March, there was something that maybe some more guidance that came out yesterday. But holy cow, man, this has been all over the place.
Yeah, it's been I call it the teeter-totter, the seesaw. I mean, it's been up and down. Where it's at right now, and it doesn't surprise me, this administration is trying to eliminate regulations or
Sure.
get rid of a lot of the regulations. The Corporate Transparency Act was put into law by, I thought it was Trump. It says it's the 2021 act, but I think it was at the end of Trump. Trump sort of says it's the Biden act, but I think it was Trump. I have to go back. I think it was the end of 2020.
Maybe they did it and then it kind of really got kicking when Biden was in.
Well, the Biden administration is the one that really got heavy-handed on it and said, thou shalt all entities file this, even though the IRS has got 95% of these entities the IRS has. Now, it is interesting. They're trying to go after money launderers,
Sure.
Russian oligarchs. They're setting up shell companies. But Congress, I don't want to say they're idiots because they're not. I mean, most of them are very bright people, but they get blinders on. If I'm a Russian oligarch and I have to register my LLC, I'm going to go hire some person to put their driver's license on there. If they want to hide it, they're still going to hide it.
Yeah.
And we got 40 million of these entities that, they got some bureaucracy in Washington, D.C. that's got to deal with 40 million of these entities. They've already filed, 18 or 19 million? And I've had to do like 100 of them, which, now they're easy to do. Let's be honest. It takes you 5 or 10 minutes to do them. But
I'm not going to lie. My guy just keeps sending me emails on it. And he keeps saying, hey, don't forget to do this. Don't forget to do this. If you want me to do it, I'll do it for you. And I keep putting it off because of some of the stuff you wrote.
Yeah.
And I would look for a shred of optimism in what you wrote. And I thought, they're never going to do this. I'm not doing it.
Well, the final guidance that came out on March 2nd on Sunday, I think. Yeah, it was Sunday. They specifically said, we are not going to fine anybody. We're not going to penalize anybody that's a U.S. citizen or a domestic entity.
Yeah.
You're going to ignore this. Now, the law is still going to be there. And that means 4 years from now, when another administration comes in, if it's not Republican based, likely they're going to say, thou shalt file this. So I think part of me says the fact that I file these, at least they're out of my hair and I don't have to deal with them anymore. Hopefully.
Sure. So. Yeah. And it would you kind of saw this coming though, right? When Trump won, you had to think that this was something they were going to address.
Yeah. No, it definitely was. You could tell from the tone, even originally when they finally said, hey, we got a March 21 deadline, but they said we reserve the right to make some changes. You knew this was coming. At least I was fairly certain it was coming.
Hey, because we're talking when we are, especially this is kind of on the top of mind here, but these 1031 exchanges, this may be, you got a lot of folks who are already thinking about it, maybe using them, but as you write about, this can also be kind of confusing too, though, right?
It especially for farmers, if you got an apartment complex, that's easy. If you got a house, that's easy. But a lot of our farmers have farmland that have what we call Section 1245 real property. That's the terminology from the tax code, is Section 1245. Well, what is that? Well, it's easier to tell a farmer what it is. It's tiling, it's a grain bin, it's fences, it's land improvements, it's a hog barn, it's a dairy parlor, it's controlled atmosphere storage, or it's anything that is not a building. And the only thing that really is a farm building, there's about 3 things that are farm building. It's a machine shed, a shop, and then corporate provided housing. If it's a regular house that they're providing for the employee, that you can exchange fairly easily. But if you're the farmer that's got a hog barn on there and, it's worth $1.5 million and you fully depreciated the hog barn and your land basis is $10,000 and you say, hey, that quarter section from the neighbors for sale, I want to sell my hog barn for $1.5 million and I'm going to roll that $1.5 million into that quarter section tax-free. Well, it's not tax-free because that quarter section doesn't have any tiling, doesn't have any grain bins. It's just bare dirt. And when it's bare dirt, you got $1.5 million gain and you got no cash. And so, you just got to be careful. Now, you can still exchange it. You just have to exchange it into 1245 real property, but it doesn't have to be purely like kind. It can be, you can have a hog barn that you sold and you can buy a grain facility. You could buy a storage facility. You could buy a dairy parlor or whatever it might be. It just has to be what we call Section 1245 real property, which is fairly broad. But if you don't do that, then you have issues. Now, if you're going from selling land that's got nothing on it and you're buying land that's got tiling and so on, that's still likely going to be okay. Now, you can have some issues, especially when we had 100% bonus depreciation. Actually, we wanted to report a gain because that would be not subject to self-employment tax. And then the depreciation on that 1245 real property allowed us to offset our self-employment income. So it's just a case when you're trying to trade land that's got a bunch of 1245 real property on it, you have to exchange it into 1245 real property to defer that gain.
Because of the complexities, do you have some folks shying away from that? Or do they just miss the opportunity altogether?
Well, I think the reality is, and I probably shouldn't say this, but I will. The reality is sometimes it gets ignored. Sometimes they value the land at what I call an artificially high price and value the building at a low price, because typically it's not allocated in the purchase and sales agreement. It's just, we sold the land, whatever's on it, we sold. But I think other times it's just missed. Nobody knows, what the rules are. It is sort of an esoteric little, part of the code. The regulations, you got to understand the regulations. So I would say it's either missed, it's ignored, or the good people sort of plan for it. They get together with people like myself. Hey, I know I got some issues here. What do we need to do?
One thing that I would think would be incredibly valuable to you is, while I'm sure some of this travel kicks your butt from time to time, but when you're on the circuit, as you talked about, you get to meet people from so many different parts of the country, right?
Yep.
Do you see the use of these? Is it geographically more common? Do you notice it like that or not?
I'm going to say certainly, I think, yes, there's always pockets that maybe are not quite aware of it as much. Also, it's a whole lot more common when you have rapid price appreciation. We know during 21, 22, 23, the Corn Belt had huge rapid appreciation, whereas other pockets maybe didn't have any price appreciation. If you got, an almond orchard or whatever you want to call it in California, maybe that actually went down in value. So the 1031 is not as popular at that point in time. But yeah, it really, I would say it's not geographic. It's more based on appreciation.
One of your other recent columns, you're talking about when the USDA did the Ag Forum that comes out in February, if I remember right, right?
Yeah, it just came out last week.
Okay.
Yeah.
Got to get my month straight. But kind of big picture, it's not overflowing with optimism. And I'm curious, as you were reading through that, what you were thinking. I doubt you were surprised by a lot.
No. I mean, and actually USDA ERS Economic Research Service had come out with a report a couple of weeks ago that was sort of interesting. They indicated second highest net income of all time. Well, at least last 50 years for farmers, but really skewed toward the livestock sector. We know cow-calf is doing very well. Dairy has actually done okay. Hogs are starting to make a comeback. Egg producers, as long as they have a flock, they're doing really well.
Yeah, no doubt.
But over on the crop side, and it is distorted because they happen to state, since 2022, net farm income is down 30 or 40% for 23 and 24. Well, 22 was an all-time high. Of course, it's going to be down. 25 projected is close to 22. It's just below 22, but that's because USDA is likely going to pump 40 billion, the 30 billion that was allocated back in December, plus they expect about 10 billion of ARC and PLC payments to come in. That's going to artificially make that number higher. So no, I wasn't surprised. There's corn producers, until we've had a little bit of rockiness here with tariffs. We're actually probably going to make money this year. I think corn producers would make money. But if you're a wheat, soybean, rice, cotton, peanut producer, you're losing money likely. So at least on a fully cash flow wise, maybe you're not losing, but certainly on a net income wise, or trying to have a return back to you, you're definitely losing money.
Because of what we saw in 22, I can't help but think kind of the traditional media probably missed that perspective.
Yeah.
When it's nonstop farm income sinking, well, when you're going from the
highs
top of the mountain.
Well, and in another column, I ended up taking a look at the projected cash price for all crops this year, or for the major crops: corn, soybean, wheat, I think sorghum and rice, and I don't think cotton. I looked at that and I compared it for this year's projected price versus what it was back on the 19 crop, the 1920 crop. And in all situations, this year's projected price is still at least 20% higher than it was back in 19. Now, we know inflation on the input side from 20, 21, 22, 23 has probably went up by 30% or more. So, it's not necessarily rosy, but we still, we're not back to the 22 price, but that was never going to be, there. And the one thing I always tell farmers, and I got farms now, quite a few years I didn't have it, but I dealt with farmers my whole life, grew up on a farm. Over a 30-year period, that's typically the cycle, although it seems like they maybe are getting a little shorter. But over a 30-year period, you're going to have 5 really good years, you're going to have 5 very horrible years, and you're going to have 20 years you break even. I mean, and the key is your 5 really good years, you got to make sure you bank it to cover the 5 bad years and get you through the 20. So that's been farming since Adam and Eve, so, or at least since, if we go back and read the Bible story in Genesis, with Joseph and so on, 7 good years followed by 7 lean years. Well, really hasn't changed much.
How did you know that? Because I think that's got to be really hard. It's easier if you've done it for a while and you've got the benefit of perspective, but when you're knee deep in it and you've had 2, 3 bad ones in a row and you're thinking, dear Lord, is it time to push me out of this? Did you know that getting in, or did you just learn it?
No, I sort of, it was interesting, because my parents were older. My dad was 47 when I was born, and my mom was 36. And they had kids, bang, bang, bang. I mean, I'm 10 months to the day older than my brother, and my sister's 13 months after that, with 1 or 2 miscarriages in between. I'm not sure what my mom said. So I grew up on the farm. I mean, I was riding on the tractor and the combine, and I remember as a teenager, because I wanted to farm. Now, my dad only had an 8th grade education. He wanted me to be a CPA. He thought that was much better than being a farmer. But I wanted to farm, and I tried to talk my dad into expanding during the mid 70s. That's when I was a teenager. My dad, the land was all paid for. Okay. They very rarely borrowed money. They built a house for cash. They bought land. I think one land they had to pay. They had a loan, but they paid it off in 5 years. And they might have had 1 combine they had to borrow money on, but not very much. And so I wanted them to expand. Well, then the 80s hit, and I actually ended up being a CPA, and I could tell, well, if I had had my dad expand during that time period, they probably would have gone broke. So I learned that in my mid 20s. And then also I'm a history buff. I've read, I still read 100, 150 books a year on average. And so I could tell There were certain books that talked about the super cycles of ag going back into the 1800s or before, but certainly US 1800s, we had super cycles both up and down. 1900s, we had super cycles up and down. And in the 21st century, we had at least two super cycles. Again, maybe not 30 years anymore because time is compressed, but we had the bull run of the ethanol period, and then we had the drought, 14 through 19. Then we had the sort of the Ukraine crisis created, at least in the row crop side, a mini boom. So that's anytime you're a price taker, you're going to have mini booms and mini busts.
We were just trying to explain, my son is 14 and a half, and he has a great grandmother who's going to be 106
Ooh,
in July.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
my wife's side's got a lot of great genes on her side. But
Well,
we
it's
were
all those women, and us guys, we don't last
uh,
very long.
well
So.
aware, and that's 100% true in that family. The one thing we were trying to explain, and your folks undoubtedly went through this too, a different time back then. And, we are so reliant, too many people are so reliant on this plastic, right? I'm
Yeah.
thinking more consumers, but I would assume your folks, the way they did it, you mentioned it was almost everything cash buy. So
Yeah.
when they had the money, they buy something. Largely speaking, when they didn't have the money, they didn't buy it.
Well, let's think back there. I remember taking, I'm going to say until I old enough to have my own car. I think I remember taking two family vacations, one to Yellowstone and one my niece, no, excuse me, my cousin. My cousin was in the Miss Wool USA contest in Portland, Oregon,
Okay,
back when I was like 5 years old.
okay.
And we went to Portland, Oregon for like 5 days, and we attended the Miss Wool USA, and it was weird. She came out on stage. She had this funky orange hat and orange outfit, and as a 6-year-old, I thought it was the ugliest thing I'd ever seen. She ended up winning the contest. So, but that was it. Two vacations, and you just did not. My parents are firm believers. Not what you made, is what you kept, and they kept most of it. So, but yeah. And even though, my parents were a little bit of they went through the Depression. Now, my dad, as the Depression started, he was born in 1912. So actually, he grew up in the Dakotas. He was the oldest boy of 4 boys, but there was 5 girls, so there was 9 kids in the family. And he hopped on a freight train in 1935 and rode it out to Ellensburg, Washington, and then homesteaded in southern Idaho and homesteaded in the Columbia Basin when that project opened up, and then met my mom, and she owned farmland down in Walla Walla because her family, she was the oldest of 12, and all of the kids, there was at that point 11 living. One had died fairly young, but all 11 owned farmland. I mean, her dad was fairly successful. Actually, he immigrated from Norway when he was 18 years old. So just that family history is always, everybody's history is just a little bit different. So.
But man, what a leap of faith to hop a freight train and get after it.
Yeah, I think my dad said I had like $5 to my name. That was the extent of his net worth at that point in time.
I'm gonna guess that growing up, you never once doubted the work ethic or commitment
Oh, yeah.
of your folks.
It's like, when I went to start as a CPA in Yakima, this is back in the mid 80s. And, tax season, you work long hours.
Sure.
And I'm like, this isn't that bad. I mean, I'm in a nice air conditioned office.
That's right.
Yeah. I'm working 12, 14 hours, 5, 6,
As I
7
sit on
days
my
a week.
butt.
Yeah. This is actually pretty nice. So, yeah.
Do you know what was it that, why'd your dad see CPA in your future?
Well, I was always a number person. I got that from my
Okay.
mom.
Okay.
My mom actually prepared tax return. Well, it's interesting. And I guess we're not really talking about real estate, but
Yeah, we'll get back to it.
I was 50-50. I was either going to be finance or I was going to be accounting major at University of Washington.
Okay.
And it was interesting, just these little things in life that tweak you one way or another. I went in there to sign up for my major or discuss signing up for my major. And up on the wall, there was a little plaque, like a little 3x5 or 5x7 plaque. Well, not even a plaque. It was more like a paper notice that said, if you wanted to be in the accounting department, you had to have at least a 3.6 GPA. And mine was like a 3.8. And I'm like, that's a little bit more special. I'm going to become an accountant. Otherwise, I would have been probably a stockbroker or whatever they call them these days. So, and I was always good on math. I mean, I'm still fairly quick on math. Again, interesting. Back in the olden days, you didn't have scanners at the grocery store. You had a machine.
Yep.
You punch in the buttons, you pull the thing. And my mom would calculate in her head what the cost was going to be. And she'd be within a nickel every single time.
Ooh.
And so about age 6, because I was one of those precocious kids, I guess. Age 6, I go, well, I'm going to start trying to add this myself. So by about age 9, I think I was faster than my mom. I could get the answer quicker than her. And she was actually proud of that. She thought that was neat. So yeah, I've always been a math nerd. So.
Man, we had something similar. My mom did all the shopping, and I don't know that she was a math genius, but now she's very disciplined.
Yep.
So she'd go in. Now we went through a long stretch. We had 4 kids. We went through a stretch in the late 70s where the stove plant where my dad used to load stoves onto a freight train, that shut down. So that kicked off kind of a multi-year stretch there where things were really thin. But my mom had this knack. Now she'd go in with a specific list.
Yep.
And she too, because no credit cards, none of that. She didn't use any of that stuff. But she knew how much she had with her. And
you weren't going to go over that number.
I literally never remember a time we're standing in that line with her where she was ever off and she's like, we got to put the bread back or whatever. Never did that ever happen. She always had that figured out.
And then my mom, she would enter canned goods into at the local fair. We had a pretty good sized fair. And I remember one year, so I was probably a teenager, and I remember she entered like 110 items every year. I mean, she cooked canned all these things. She got 107 blue ribbons, 2 red ribbons, and a white ribbon for 3rd place. And she was livid over that white ribbon. I mean, she was absolutely livid. I'm like, Mom, you got 107 blues. What do you care? And something happened. So, but
that's somebody who strives for the best.
Yeah.
Hey, you mentioned tariffs, and I know a lot of this is kind of early on as we talk, but as we talk this week, Trump has gone forward with the tariffs on Mexico and Canada. How do we know how this is going to play out? Before we started recording, we even joked about, on your Substack platform, I think people, the thoughtful people appreciate that you get out there, something happens, here's what I think about it. I may be right, may be wrong. And if something's not quite right, you can follow up with a column to say, hey, here's how that played out.
Yeah.
So when it comes with tariffs, like, what are you making of that?
I just don't know. I mean, I think it's still a little bit of posturing. I think he's still in the process of trying to get some concessions from both Mexico and Canada. But when they're starting to talk about offsetting tariffs, like on India and some of these other countries, if you look at history, trade wars have caused some fairly bad depressions and recessions. And now part of this also, does Trump and the team want to put us into a recession? Because if we go into recession, that then allows the Federal Reserve to cut interest rates. The problem is Federal Reserve cutting interest rates is only on the short term. It has nothing to do with the long term in a way, and the long term is just set by the bond market. And that would be temporary. So I mean, we're at what, 36, soon to be 40 trillion as far as the deficit. If our average interest rate suddenly goes to 4% from 2%, that's a double. 4 times 40 is 1.6 trillion of interest right now. The interest on an annual basis is a little bit under $1 trillion, because a lot of those notes are still coming. They're getting refinanced at going from a much lower rate to a much higher rate. I just have concerns. I mean, I'm not concerned necessarily for myself, but I'm more concerned for my kids and grandkids. What the reality there is going to be.
I feel like the more optimistic people you talk to say, all right, this guy's been in business I mean, we know how he plays. As a senator from North Dakota said, he's a guy who kind of goes into a room, drops a grenade, leaves the room, and people have to come in there and kind of pick up the pieces of what's left. And I think the optimists go, all right, he's a non-traditional guy,
Yep.
gonna shock the system, do a bunch of stuff, and kind of live dangerously, and maybe he gets the concessions he looks for. But in the meantime, I mean, that can bring a lot of angst.
Yeah. Well, and Trump historically as a business person, he's not worth what he says he's ever been worth.
Sure.
I mean, we know
Yeah.
that. He's gone through the bankruptcy process multiple times.
Yeah.
I really don't want the US government to go through the bankruptcy process. And we already have them saying, hey, we need to get rid of the debt limit. Well, that's the only thing that's even putting a little bit of pressure on us. And I'm, a matter of fact, I was just writing a column for Top Producer magazine, and I'm talking about the fact that, the House budget says, okay, we can cut taxes by $4.5 trillion. Now we want $2 trillion of cost offsets, but we're going to cut taxes by $4.5 trillion. And then over on the Senate side, it says, well, if we extend the Trump tax cuts, that's not really cutting it, or it really should be no effect. And then over on the House side, Speaker Johnson has come out and said, I sort of like that idea. So we're not talking now tax cuts of $4.5 trillion. We're talking maybe $9 trillion, because to extend the Trump tax cuts is going to cost $4.5 trillion. Well, we got another 4.5. Now we're at $9 trillion. The budget's still going to go up by $9 trillion.
Yeah.
Let's be honest. Now, is there enough economic growth to maybe make that $7 trillion, $6 trillion? Maybe, but it's hard to know. I mean, even when our economy has been overheated coming out of the pandemic, we still only grew at maybe 3%.
Yeah.
If any politician says we're going to grow at 5 or 6%, that they're wrong. So.
And that's it's not sexy. They're going through this whole Doge movement, this Department of Government Efficiency, to look for, they're lopping off federal workers, and which seems haphazard. At some point, you have to hope they figure out what they're doing here, but they're rehiring some of the people they should have never gotten rid of, and all kinds of stuff. So that's going to be perhaps a little sliver of savings once they get this all figured out. But big picture, if there's this recognition that we need some kind of fiscal responsibility, extending the tax cuts, that was never offset to begin with.
Yeah.
And if you're going to raise them, you're just going to escalate how deeper we go into debt. You can't lop off the federal workforce to save those things.
Yeah. Now, certainly there's other things that, because they don't like the Inflation Reduction Act, all the green credits out there. Now, part of that could affect farmers, 45Z.
Yeah,
although Biden never got any great guidance out on 45Z. Still, we don't have any great guidance on it. They've given us some, but that raises maybe 400, 500, 600 billion over 10 years. They've already come out with, hey, we want to repeal the $7,500 credit for an EV and charge an extra $1,000 to cover the road repairs, which there's validity to that. I mean, EVs are a lot heavier. They do more damage to the road, and they don't pay a gas tax. So yes, they should, at the federal level, there should be a cost of having a EV. If I, as a person that has a internal combustion car, and I'm paying 20 cents a gallon or 30 cents a gallon for fuel, the EV should be paying something, and eventually it'll go to a per mile cost, I'm guessing.
See, but it's that kind of logic. We need
I'm in trouble. We're using logic.
It is, but you need that times about 1 million for all these little changes they're going to have to do all over the place, because you mentioned your kids and grandkids. Man, I've got 2 kids. I would love to know when either of them will ever see just 1 year of a balanced budget.
In the last 50 years, and it was not a Republican, Reagan never had a balanced budget. It was Clinton. We had about 1 or 2 years, about 90, I think 93, 94, 95, somewhere in there.
And George W. was headed that way.
Yeah.
And then they did tax cuts without offsetting it.
Yeah.
And they went backwards.
Well, and then we had the war, that always, the first war, or no, that was the second war. So, yeah. So or it depends which George Bush you're talking about, 1 or 2.
We're going with W. Yeah. So you can tell you're a guy who reads a lot.
Yeah, I try.
I know your history. Hey, appreciate the, we went all over the place. Appreciate the conversation. It's always good to catch up with you. And one of the things that I really value listening to you and reading your columns is that you've been around the block long enough. You got some perspective on stuff. And that, I think that's always beneficial as we have these conversations.
Well, Dave, thanks for calling me old.
I did not do that.
I'm well seasoned,
love, man.
well seasoned. So, but,
all right. Hey, Paul, thank you very much. We appreciate it.
You're welcome. Thanks, Dave.
Take care. To learn more about Paul Neiffer and his expertise on ag land tax policy, you can check out our profile piece about him. It's in the American Farmland Owner newsletter. It's the place where landowners get their news. Our weekly collection of the top developments, challenges, and opportunities in the world of farmland. Check it out. It's free at AmericanFarmlandOwner.com. Thanks for joining us here on the podcast, and thanks for caring about the future of our farmland.